Hi there berries, welcome to my Thresh Season 13 support guide. The last time we did a Thresh guide was back in Season 10, so that was 3 years ago, so it was time that we updated the Thresh guide so you guys can learn how to play Thresh if you want to. This whole channel is based on League of Legends support gameplay, so if you're interested in learning some more support stuff, also guides for other champions that I've already done for Season 13, including Milio, be sure to subscribe and check out their videos on the YouTube channel. I also stream at twitch.tv/Bizzleberry if you want to ask me any other tips or things like that, or watch some live high ELO content. Right, going into the guide, as always with the guide structure that we do it all in one take. I'm generally really good at doing it all in one take, and also we'll be covering every aspect of playing Thresh in this guide, so all the runes that I will advise you to consider using when playing Thresh, items, summoners, abilities, ability skill orders, and any other tips and tricks in order to be able to increase your win rate when playing Thresh. Now, disclaimer, Thresh is a engaged champion and he is one of the more mechanical champions that you can play. Generally, all the engaged champions are higher up on the mechanical skill level compared to some of the enchanters, for example, like Milio. Milio is an enchanter. Thresh is a hard engaged champion, but if you are able to get through the first few games of his kit, then you will start enjoying him a lot more. So basically the learning curve is quite steep at the very beginning, and then it starts to even off a little bit, but the first kind of couple of games could end up being slightly brutal, so don't be too put off if the first couple of games don't go too well when you play Thresh. So Thresh has a couple of different rune builds that you can go. You've got a kind of slightly more tankier Thresh during the laning phase, or you've got a higher catch and kill potential in the laning phase. The tankier version is the Guardian build that you're seeing on your screen right now. Guardian, nothing too crazy there. It's a very classic kind of Guardian build. You could opt out and changing, for example, Biscuits for a Hextech Flash if you're familiar on using that, but because you're probably watching this guide, I decided to give you guys something a little bit more basic in terms of the secondary. So Biscuits and Cosmic would be my advice for your first playthrough of Thresh, and maybe trying out this build for your first couple of games on Thresh might be the best. Going into Glacial, this will give you a higher catch potential and also makes use of the Hextech Flash. So if you don't know how Hextech Flash works, basically when your flash is on cooldown, you'll have Hextech Flash, which is basically when you hold down your flash button when it's on cooldown, you will start channeling essentially, and then basically flashing forward to that location after a couple of seconds. Is really good when you're like hiding in bushes and you know that the enemy can't see you, so basically it's kind of like you're flashing into the enemy team, and you can get more catch potential that way. It's really good for mainly like the laning phase. Glacial Augment is once again, a really good augment in terms of catching out. So you will be a bit squishy since you wouldn't have Guardian, or if you wanted to switch out Guardian for Aftershock, you could do. But Glacial will give you the most catch potential. So if you're up against, for example, a squishy enchanter like Nami, for example, Glacial is going to be really good in making sure that she will have to use Flash, and even if she uses Flash, she might still die after getting caught out. So this is your kind of standard Glacial builds. If you don't know how Glacial works, basically when you land a crowd control, so in this instance when you land your hook on Thresh, or if you do your flay, you'll put like a Glacial slow patch on the ground, so it makes it more difficult for the enemy to get away. So really good catch potential of this one. If you're really looking for kills, particularly in the laning phase, then Glacial is the one to opt into, but you will be a little bit squishier, so do factor that in. Next, we're going to be going into the practice tool, and we're going to be talking about summoners, and we're also going to start prepping up going into the custom game and start talking about everything else from items to abilities. So first we need to find Thresh, unlock in Thresh. So very standard Thresh is Ignite Flash, because you are generally looking for kills in the laning phase. You generally are trying to look to take that Glacial Augment rune in order to look for those kills. Ignite is a really, really good tool. If you feel like maybe for whatever instance you might need to be a bit more on the defense, you could do an exhaust, but it's either exhaust or ignite. Exhaust can still give you some catch potential, but I would generally recommend that you take ignite. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to talk about items, and then we're going to go into abilities and then the ability skill order, and then after we've done all of that, we're going to be talking about some little bit more advanced tips that you can do when playing Thresh, or maybe even against playing a Thresh. So yeah, buckled up. So items, we have the relic shield start, very standard relic shield over the steel shoulder guards, because you got a lot of AP ratios on your abilities. You got AP ratios on your Q and your E and your ultimate, and your ultimate has actually a really nice AP ratio of a 1:1, and your Q also has a really good AP ratio of a 0.9. So really good AP ratios on Thresh. Then we are going to be moving into a more tanky item. Some people opt into going into a Shrilliers on Thresh to help chase down and engage, but I think that's I don't advise that at all, especially for newer players, and honestly even on higher ends of players I don't even recommend it. You want to be tanky when you're playing Thresh, and you've got two main options. You've got either the Locket of the Iron Solari or Even Shroud. Now both in terms of actual like stat value and tanking stat values is exactly the same. The main difference is what you're going to be getting in terms of the actual item passive. So Even Shroud, whenever you immobilize a champion, so that's with your Q or your E, you're going to that target will take 10% increased damage. So it's really good additional flat damage taken that they will take. On the opposite end, you've got Locket, which gives you and your allies a shield, which will decay really quickly over time. So you want to pop it for a moment where there's going to be a lot of damage coming in. Most basic example, Karthus ulti is about to land, you pop the Locket and you're going to block a good chunk of damage. Now, if you are a newer player and you really aren't sure what to take, I would advise taking Even Shroud because there's no active to use. Locket, you actually have to press a button on to activate the item, whereas Even Shroud will just be happening naturally. So if you are not very comfortable playing Thresh at the moment, hence why you're watching this guide, I would advise you to start off with Even Shroud, and then once you start getting more familiar with Thresh's things, start picking up and experimenting more with Locket. Locket is a really good tanky item, but the team amp that you're going to get from Even Shroud, it will always happen, and it's not something that you wouldn't necessarily have to worry about. So for this case, we're going to be taking the Even Shroud. But before that, generally you're going to be wanting to lean towards getting the Boots of Lucidity before you end up completing the Even Shroud. The movement speed is extremely important, especially on engaged champions, where you're going to want to, use your movement speed to help catch off the enemy team. Now, once you bought the Even Shroud, it starts getting really odd in terms of build orders for a lot of the engaged supports right now in Season 13. Generally, the most kind of, if you don't know kind of area, I would recommend Thornmail. Anytime that you get hit, once you get to the Bramble Vest on this, so make sure you pick up the Bramble Vest before you're picking up anything else when going pathing into the Thornmail. Whenever you get hit by an auto attack, you're going to be applying 40% grievous wounds onto the enemy champion, which basically means they take 40% less healing. If you know for a fact that you don't need anti-heal, so say for you know more of what the enemy team is, say for example they don't have much healing at all, then you can start moving into something. I prefer a Knight's Vow. It makes it so that your AD carry or whoever's carrying in your team takes 10% less damage if you're near them, and that damage kind of gets redirected onto you, which is really nice. Or Zeke's. I don't feel like the damage buff that Zeke's gives, so you have to actually choose an allied champion to use this item on, and then it's kind of on until you swap it. But whenever you immobilize a champion, kind of similar with the Even Shroud, your allied champion basically does more damage to them. So once again, it's kind of another amplifier, but for one individual person in your team rather than the whole team. But I think Knight's Vow is generally the better option overall. When I use Zeke's, I don't really see the damage climbing up particularly high, but making sure that your AD carry or whoever's carrying the game is staying alive a little bit longer, choosing that Knight's Vow target I think is slightly more important if you don't need the grievous wounds. Now generally, as always, when you're playing support, you're only going to be able to pick up one legendary item before the game starts nearing its end. So say for example in this case we pick up a Knight's Vow. Then final item is we're going to want to pick up a Watchful Wardstone. When we hit level 13, that item is going to automatically upgrade into a Vigilant Wardstone, which is going to give us 12% more ability power, haste, attack damage and bonus health, and also allow us to put down one additional control ward and one additional stealth ward as well. So we can have 3 normal wards and 1 control ward, up to 2 control wards and 4 stealth wards. So we get 6 wards in total on the map, giving us extra vision and control, and at 1100 gold it is a pretty good item. In fact, it's actually probably overpowered, but a lot of supports don't realize that, so exploit it while you can. And then when you're going into your last item, you could end up be picking up Thormail, because you might have realized the enemy team might be getting healing. Maybe the enemy team is getting closer to Ocean Soul, and then we should increase their healing even more, so you might need to end up going into Thormail. Otherwise, you can opt into specific resistances against the enemy team. Say they've got like an enemy Syndra doing particularly well, you could opt in into a Force of Nature to increase your magic resistance a little bit, and increasing your movement speed in order to make more plays. Or you could go into something like a Randowinds or like a Frozen Heart to not only increase your own armor, but also reduce the amount of damage you're taking physically, at least anyway. But generally, that this is kind of like super excuse me, I'm choking, super luxury items. Now that's the item section and my choking fit over. We're going to be talking about the abilities, and we're going to be going over passive and all abilities, and then after that we're going to be talking about skill orders, and then we're going to be talking about how you can use those skills to increase your win chance in a game. So let's first talk about Thresh's passive. Thresh collects souls of dead enemies by walking near them, permanently granting him armor and ability power. However, Thresh does not gain armor per level. Champions and large monsters and minions always drop a soul, while small minions only sometimes drop 1. Epic monsters drop 2 souls. So what that basically means is, if you kill an enemy champion, you get 1 soul. Well, a soul will drop onto the ground. If you kill a cannon minion or stand near a cannon minion that gets killed by an allied champion, they'll drop a soul. The melee and casting minions have a chance of dropping a soul. When you kill Dragon, when you killed Herald, when you kill Baron, those objectives will also drop 2 souls. So you got a little bit of a mini game on Thresh. To pick up souls, you either just walk over them, or you will be able to use your lantern, which we'll go over in a second. And your lantern, if you throw your lantern over to an area where there's souls, they'll actually go into the lantern and you will receive them. So that's a pretty nice way of being able to collect souls in the laning phase, and you're up against double poke and you know you don't need your lantern and there's a lot of souls dropped. It's a good way to be able to pick up those souls, because you will need those souls, because it does has a lot of additional benefits that isn't mentioned here. So yes, it gives you 1 armor per soul, gives you 1 ability power per soul. Also on your lantern shield, which we'll talk about once we get to that, it also increases the amount of shield that your lantern does. It also increases the passive on your flay. The souls is considered in that number too. So there's a lot of things going on in terms of souls. So souls are very important. Just try and keep and collecting as many souls as you can. I can't really give you a vague number because every game situation is different, but you're going to want to try and pick up as many as you can safely. Now Thresh's Q is his hook. Now you've got 2 ability presses on this one. So you've got your standard hook, and if you just fire it out and you miss it, that's it. But if you land it on an enemy champion, so this target dummy here for example, you'll start pulling the target towards you. And you can see right there was 2 kind of yoinks that it kind of does. So 1 yoink and then 2 yoinks. When your hook is on the champion like that, if you were to tap Q again, so we're going to tap... That does not work with the... Yeah, that was kind of awkward actually. Let me turn off the cooldown reduction because it kind of bugged out. So if you use Q again, when you land your hook on an enemy champion, you'll start dashing over towards that target. an additional tip onto this, say for example you hook an Olaf with his ulti up and he's immune to crowd control, your hook will start following Olaf no matter where he is, and then you'll be able to queue to wherever he goes to as well. So do note, you will basically follow anyone even if they like blink during the initial Q animation and your Q latches on. You will go to that target basically no matter what if you press Q again. So in this situation, land the hook, press Q, and then you fly over on top of the target. So the quicker you kind of do this, the quicker you'll fly over. You can kind of wait a little bit longer, so until like basically the second yank, you can kind of let the two kind of yoinks happen and then fly over. So you see how we did two yoinks there instead of just one, and then we got to fly over. The raw damage from this ability is really, really good. If you land this ability on any unit, the cooldown gets reduced onto the Q. So even more incentive to actually make sure you're landing your Q on the actual target. Alright, let's move that back. Thresh's second ability is his Lantern. So his Lantern, when you drop it down, any allies inside, they will be shielded. So for example, if you're looking at this allied target dummy, pretend it's a champion, they get a little shield. The shield has been nerfed over the past few years. It used to be a lot bigger. It also scales primarily from souls, so hence collecting the souls is pretty important. So this doesn't scale off AP or anything like that, it's just purely souls. So the more souls you get, the more the shield will be stronger. You can also affect this on yourself. So you can also take the shield here too. Also, you can have it so when you're basically, the effect of the lantern is that you can have one allied champion, not yourself, can click on the lantern, and then this target dummy, pretend this as a champion, if they were to right click the lantern, they would go to your current location. So you could, for example, once again with like the same way how the hook works, but this works the other way. So an allied champion going to you, if you flash even outside of this range and they're still flying in, they will still come to you. So you can extend the range of your W. So they will, as soon as they click that, they will go to you until they finally land onto you. One thing about the lantern as well, so say for example you chuck up the lantern but you need the shield. If you walk out of the circle, you'll get given the shield. The lantern will like teleport directly back to you, and that's how you can get the shield. There are some situations where you throw out your lantern to save an ally but they die, and you've got like a debuff on you, and you can, if you walk out of the circle range, you can have that shield to protect you. It saved me a couple of times from like ignite ticks, for example. Also, you know, when the ally clicks the lantern and comes to you, the lantern comes back to you as well that way. So you will also then collect the shield once the ally basically comes to you. Thresh's third ability is his Flay, and it's probably one of the hardest skill shots for people to kind of wrap their head around. So the best way I can kind of show this is by, you know, showing you the actual kind of like tooltip circle of it. So the Thresh Flay kind of is what it is on the screen. It's like a rectangle, and then there's also effects to kind of like sides of you as well. And you can kind of pull targets to you or away from you. So for this example here, if we want this enemy champion to be pushed away from my target dummy ally, you want to put the cursor as far as away, you know, as from your target dummy as possible, and on like that side of the player. So that way we're pushing it away. If, for example, we wanted to increase our engage potential, we can pull them towards us by putting the cursor behind us, and that will kind of pull them in. So a really kind of classic engage is you want to hook, fly over, and then flay towards your team to isolate that person and increase the gap of safety for this target dummy to the other target dummy team. Do you know what I mean? So we're isolating them a bit more. This effect is AoE. You can affect more than one targets with the flay, so you can flay multiple champions in. The flay can also cancel dashes. So for example, Tristana rocket jump, you can kind of cancel. So for example, if you were to hook in a Tristana here, fly in, you're going to want to wait until she kind of wants to dash away and then catch her mid jump to then flay her back. And then that way you can then look to interrupting the jump in order for her to not be able to get away. There are other champions with dashes as well, like Yasuo. You can kind of cancel with this as well. So really good dash cancel as well, this. Lastly, his ultimate, The Box, puts down a pentagon. You can basically, if any enemy champion touches one of these walls, they're going to take a lot of damage. Also, they take a massive slow as well. Fortunately, you know, it's quite unfortunately in a way, it's quite obviously hard. It's obvious to see, and people aren't naturally going to walk into it unless they're not paying attention in a massive team fight. But you can encourage them to touch a wall by flaying them into it, or using your hook to push them in. So you can drag them around a little bit with your hook. You can move around. So that's another thing I didn't actually mention, is with your hook you can kind of like pull them to, they will always come to you, so you can actually kind of redirect the kind of angle that they're taking as well. So you can force them into the wall with your Q or your E. But yeah, the base, as I mentioned before, the base damage on this is a 1-to-1 ratio. So the more souls that you've got, this is going to do a lot of damage, and it's a 99% slow for 2 seconds. So basically, they're essentially rooted if they touch your wall. They can only take damage, by the way, from one instance of the wall. So you can't like flay on that wall and then force them into that wall, or you can force them into that wall, but they will only take damage from one of the walls. Can I get it to work? Yeah, so there they didn't take two instances of damage. But I believe, yeah, the slow will still kind of happen, but it only works for half the duration. So if they get hit by one wall, they get slowed for 2 seconds. If they hit another wall, then they'll get hit by a 1 second slow. And yeah, you can only get hit by one instance of damage. So how do we use all of these kind of in order to get an advantage in a lane? As you can probably tell, there's a lot of things going on the Thresh, and with the warning at the start of the video, he is a high mechanical champion, but there's a lot of rewards for pulling stuff off with Thresh. So we've already kind of talked to us about some basic combos. So his very basic combo is, you know, you're Eing in, it's gonna, well, and then you're flying in, and then you're flying towards your team. That's generally the most basic thing you can do on Thresh. If you have Glacial Augment at the time of you landing that hook, they're going to have that slow on the ground, so it's going to be harder for their team to necessarily catch up and save that player. In terms of like, you don't necessarily have to play an aggressive role either when you're playing Thresh, because of the way his lantern works and that you can save allies. You can easily use this lantern as a defensive tool to get people out of a really bad situation. But that does require your ally right-clicking on the lantern. And do note things like wards, for example. A control ward placed in the center of this lantern can make it very difficult for your ally to click on. So if you're ever up against a Thresh, if you've got a spare control ward, put a control ward right in the middle of the lantern. It means they'll start like attacking the control ward as opposed to clicking the lantern at times. That can make it really frustrating for the, you know, the AD carry in a situation to be able to click on the lantern to get away. You've also got another situation where you can use lantern aggressively. So say for example you've got a jungler coming down. If you chuck out your lantern, land your Q, you're flying in, the jungler there can use that lantern as you're engaging to fly in with you and do the play. You can kind of also do that like that to make it a bit more subtle. But I do recommend potentially chucking at the W first, just so that the jungler ends up actually clicking the lantern. Because if in high elo you might be able to get away with it, but doing that, the jungler has to be fully aware of what your kit's available to do. So chucking the lantern like that is like the most extreme basic version of this combination. Doing hook, W, so here we're doing Q, W, Q, flay, my E. And then at this point when you're on top of them, you can whack down your ultimate and it makes it extremely difficult for them to get out. They can flash over the wall, but then obviously then they're using their flash. So that's like the more kind of extreme combo on Thresh. Earlier we talked about on Thresh's E, you can cancel dashes. That is just something that you're going to have to just practice over time. It's a very difficult skill to kind of explain for each of the individual champions that dash. In order to do that, it just becomes with time and practice. And sometimes in more extreme kind of higher mechanical matchups, when like there's a really good Tristana who knows you're going to flay her rocket jump, it sometimes ends up being like a cheeky waiting game. Tristana might think that you're going to panic use it and use it straight away, so she's going to hold on to using her rocket jump until she knows that your flay is off cooldown. But then in some cases you might not use your flay at all because you can see she's not buffering it, so it ends up being sometimes a little bit of like a mind game, like who's going to end up using the dash first. Other kind of little tricks that you can do is, I'm going to put down another target dummy here. If I can find the target dummy. So another little trick that you can kind of do, which I've used a couple of times, especially with Glacial Augment in order to make a play happen, is here what I'm going to do is I'm going to do the more advanced combo that I mentioned of doing Q, W, Q, and then we're going to do the flay. But I want you to imagine that this unit here is actually a minion, and that this target dummy, this is actually that they're standing like too close to the actual minion in front of them. So what we can actually use is, even though we don't land our hook on the actual target, we can use our flay, we can use our Glacial Augment from hitting the flay, because the Glacial Augment won't proc off of the Q because it's hitting a minion. It will end up working off of the flay. We can use that as our baseline engage. So for example, so pretend this minion, this guy at the front here is a minion. So you can see how you're going to end up flaying that enemy champion behind that minion, and then getting them locked up as quickly as possible, with then hopefully your jungler kicking the lantern, flying in with you. And that's another way to get a good catch off. It's not as necessarily effective as landing the hook on them anyway, but it does have that element of surprise. When you do hit level 9 and start having a little bit more cooldown reduction, your hook's going to be off cooldown relatively quickly anyway, because if you remember, when you're landing your hook on an enemy unit, it doesn't matter if it's a minion or a champion, the cooldown is going to come off slightly off your Q as well. So when you have more points on it, your hook is actually going to go down to a really, really low cooldown. So by the time you have done the initial play of it bugged out because of the amount of cooldown. So by the time you've done the initial play of flying in, let me just turn off the auto refresh cooldown. So you're flying in, you're getting the flay off. Your hook at this point will pretty much be off cooldown again. So then you'll be able to then actually land the hook, and then it's like you have the hook anyway. So you'll be able to make that follow-up catch if they end up using their flash to run off, etc. So really, really powerful tool and little trick there. You won't use it necessarily too much, but it's a good effective way of catching out an enemy player. In terms of the actual ability skill order, it used to be a lot more flexible on Thresh on what you wanted the level between, like maxing your flay for more auto hit damage, or maxing your W early for more shield, but they kind of nerfed certain elements of Thresh to the point where there's only one specific like line that you should be going into, and that is you're going to want to max your Q early. You're definitely going to want to max your Q first. So as you can see, my hook is on a 5-second cooldown, If I land the hook, the cooldown gets removed by 2 seconds, and also the enemy champion is going to be stunned and pulled for 1.5 seconds. So really there's only a 1.5 second window where the enemy champion is going to be able to be free and kind of do whatever they want. And then, you know, during that time, we're doing flays, we're doing our ultimate, and anything else, glacial augments. So, okay, they won't be locked down for 1.5 seconds, but they're definitely going to be in a tight spot where there's going to be a lot of other forms of crowd control going onto them to possibly prevent them from even looking to get away, especially if they have no flash. So we're definitely maxing Q first. It's also a solid amount of damage as well. As you can see, there's 305 magic damage maxed out, but this is with no souls. As the game goes on, it's not uncommon that you'll be on like 80-ish souls, so this would be around about 360-ish damage from your Q, which is pretty insane considering on how low it can potentially be on cooldown. Generally, Thresh's damage is quite absurdly high actually, considering he's an engage. His flay is what you're going to be wanting to max second, and then finally his W. You don't get a massive amount from loading your W. The amount of cooldown reduction per point isn't very high, and you're only getting 20 shield per point too, so not really the most effective way of investing your points. So it's always going to be Q, E, W, and then obviously taking your ultimate whenever that's available to you. Other than that, I don't really feel like there's anything else to cover. I've covered a lot of the kind of different kind of stages of using your combos on Thresh. Some of it will be reliant on some of it will be reliant on allied champions actually clicking your lanterns. That is the big RNG factor of playing Thresh. You could land the most perfect combo, but if you're putting a lantern down and no one clicks it to follow up, it's going to make that engage a lot more painful. Same if you're trying to save an ally and they don't click the lantern and they could have been saved that way too. It can get frustrating at times, and there's definitely been cases in Diamond Plus where people haven't clicked the lantern when they needed to. So do bear that in mind. The lower ELO you are when using Thresh, the amount of people actually utilizing your lantern will become lower and lower. Other than that, there's nothing really else I feel like I need to showcase on this. I wish you all the best in your Thresh gameplay. He is, as I said at the start, a difficult champion to master and a difficult champion to get into, but after you've done the first couple of games, I do recommend that you go into a practice tool and try out his flay. It's kind of a weird ability to use at first, but I promise it's not that difficult once you get used to a few flays, and kind of get used to where you need to put the actual cursor to where Thresh is. So don't forget, the cursor is always based on where Thresh is, so you need to do it on either side of Thresh, so it will always kind of go to where your lantern, to where your cursor is. So if you're putting the cursor behind Thresh, it's going to be pushing the enemies behind him. If you are interested in any of the other supports and learning those, I do have support guides on the YouTube channel. Be sure to subscribe. All the best, and wish you all the luck in your support Thresh games. Bye bye.